Hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Julie and this is Iris. I saw your name when you popped on earlier and I was like, Isis. I'm like, oh wait, no. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about expertise, which is, I think, a very loaded topic, but also a very beautiful, interesting topic. I'm really excited to see where this one goes. So, how are you? How are things? How has your last week been?
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and thank you for just coming together in this beautiful space again. Let's talk about expertise. I've been good. Last week has been magical. It's been like wow. Talking about expertise, it's really has been this mastering of, okay, what's present right now and how do I deal with that? And then how do I put that in service to actually like catalyzing the local impact projects that are happening right here? And how do I put my network and social value that I have, with all the relationships into service of this place that holds 2.5% of the Earth's biodiversity, including traditional communities that still know how to live with this amount of life. So yeah, it has been pretty magical. Um, I don't want to be all witchy woozy, but let's say the new
No,
moon
do it.
definitely
Let's
had
do
its
it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
all right, the new moon definitely had its influence. If I look at my astrology chart, which I don't take very seriously in for my just in general, I don't take myself serious. But Sagittarius is my north node. So it's kind of
Ooh,
like I'm very much into, yeah, just following steps on my soul's mission's path, which I kind of walk here down in the Osa with Los Higuerones. And with that, it's just kind of like, yeah, everything that I'm doing with a particular intention, with presence, with attention, is just catalyzing a whole lot. So yeah, talking about expertise
exciting. Exciting.
is
So
definitely
just for
building up some
everyone,
expertise last week.
yeah. For everyone who doesn't know, I just want to pop back to the astrology piece for a hot second. So with the North Node, um, typically like if you run your chart, if you don't know, you're like, I know what my sun sign is, and that's it. So like typically when people have a reading, like if you're looking for like a reading or whatever, you can look for like your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising. Those typically are all applicable to you in any type of reading. But when Iris is talking about the North Node is what you're really here to like learn and master in this lifetime. So like for her, the North Node in Sagittarius, so she's going to look up like what does that mean for the North Node being in Sagittarius? Like, what am I here to like step into in this life? And then your South Node is what you've already like experienced and lessons and things you've already gained in other lifetimes, maybe even early in this lifetime. And these are the things that sometimes can be points and things that we're still growing through. So I'll use myself for an example. And your south node is always the exact opposite on the wheel too. So for me, my north node is in Aries, which is stepping into leadership and it's action and it's all of these like things, right? Um, and so we are currently still, the north node in astrology is currently still in Aries. And then the south node, if your north node is in Aries, means that your south node is in Libra. And so Libra is all about balance. It's the scales, right? It's also about relationship and harmony in relationship. So the other piece of, I would say, the Libra South Node or North Node, depending on where your nodes are. But for me, the other piece of that is like the people pleasing tendency. So the things that I've learned and that I've gotten to grow through in this lifetime is like getting rid of people pleasing tendencies and always trying to keep the peace and things like that, moving into Aries where I'm stepping into my power and I'm stepping into my leadership and these types of things. So I just wanted to clarify that for anyone who is new to astrology and maybe doesn't know a lot about those things. So for Sagittarius, because now I'm just interested. So Sag is also a fire sign. But what is the meaning behind a North Node in Sagittarius?
So that's just, that's what I've been perceiving from it, right? So what I've been, and what I can remember from it is really like building these renewed systems that transform society, and with like unconventional ways of educating and learning, and also learning the unconventional ways of, like, so basically what it for me it comes down to, if I because we can all, like, it's very abstract. What it for me comes down to is like what I'm doing with Los Higuerones, for example. Like we're building this, we're bringing people together in a place in the Osa Peninsula where we collaborate and collaborate all kind of alternative ways that are socially, economically, and environmentally more sustainable, which are alternatives, right? They're unconventional because they're not the conventional way of going about things. Um, and then it's also becoming a learning center, which is kind of based on the old school principles of, like, okay, what are the life skills we actually need? And those are also kind of like unconventional ways that are not put in our system right now, in our educational system. So for me, actually, that the whole idea of Los Higuerones kind of translates as, I've translated that as, what is the Sag bringing? And then also, if we're talking about like fire, it's for me stands for passion, right? And fire, is in many cultures linked to the West. It's this this sign of passion, the energy of passion, but also the energy of like refining. Because working with fire, as and some fire tenders might know that, and we're talking really alternative right now. So sorry for all the people that are really just were wishing for like a very down to earth conversation. There are fire tenders in this world. Yeah, there are people that are mastering the art of fire, and that's actually really important, just like mastering the art of water, earth, and air. So, but yeah, fire tenders know that too. It's a very delicate process, needs a lot of patience. So for me, my biggest learning there is also like, okay, this is the dream, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's all coming. And then with the passion I have, but the patience, like the balance there. So yeah, that's for me what it means. I'm
Beautiful.
wondering though, let's
Beautiful.
talk about you for a second. How do you translate your Aries North Node in what you're doing right now?
For me specifically, it's stepping into the leadership with the breakdown of structure. So if we look at like Pluto's moving into Aquarius, or technically has, but like the energy is still kind of catching up because it's at 0 degrees until I think sometime in January. Um, so really like this is the breakdown and the crumbling of systems and structures that we currently have that we know aren't working. So for some people, this means the patriarchy, right? But for me, having a North Node in Aries, to me, it's like that stepping into leadership, and it's stepping into leadership in a way that bridges the gaps that society has. So for me, personally, it is taking the skills and knowledge that I have within like this corporate structure, this structure that we're breaking down
Mm,
and moving away from. And it's bridging this gap into creating these new structures and creating these new opportunities, which, in a sense, to me, is also the bringing back of old ways. Just like some of the things that you're talking about when you talk about the fire tenders, if people are like, what? Like if you've ever been to some type of very like spiritual ceremony, um, oftentimes you will have like a fire tender that is there, and their job is just to keep the fire going. And so we can feed things into the fire, right? You can feed the fears, you can feed the things that you're wanting to get rid of, because it's also such a beautiful way of transitioning. And Aries is also a fire sign. So for me, it's really like this breaking down of the old systems and the old ways and the things that don't work. And for me, it's been a very personal journey of like rediscovery, because if we look at like conditioning and programming, And then we also look at like, so what's the conditioning and what's the programming there that is rooted in the old systems and the old ways that I get to look at within myself and break down to the point where they don't have a hold over me anymore, so that I can then step into the creation of the new system. Because if I haven't fully embodied that within myself, how do I bring it into leadership? Right. And so this, I think, is a beautiful segue into the topic of expertise as well, because you get to look at like, what's the expertise that you hold currently? And that can be through so many things, right? Like, so for me, I've an educational expertise, if you will, for whatever that's worth. And then I have the corporate expertise, right? And then I have this lifelong learning expertise and this like this drive and this yearning to learn. It's also tied into my human design because I have
Mm,
a 3-5 profile. And both of those are experienced through learning. Like I learned through experience and then I share and I teach through the experience that I've gained. So that's why I think experience is such a huge topic. Um, and I was on a podcast like a month ago or so where someone was asking me, his question was like, what if, he's a teacher for high school level and does leadership classes. And he's like, what would you say to people who are wanting to get into like coaching and don't have any experience? And I'm like, well, that's a very interesting question, right? Because this can be twofold. You can have all the experience in the world, but still be shitty at what you do, right? Like just because you've been doing something for decades does not mean you're good at it. And you can also have been doing something for decades and be like the most phenomenal person in the world at what you do, right?
yeah.
And then you can be very, very young and you can have like the wisdom and the if you're opening up to things that are, from past lives or from other cultures, or you've been brought up in a culture that has this innately ingrained wisdom of the culture within it, then you have the ability to, at 18 years old or 16 years old, to take this wisdom and this knowledge that you have, this expertise, and use that in a way to bring beauty to the world and to bring healing to the world and to make huge, massive shifts and changes. So I think expertise is really a matter of perspective as well. So I've met numerous people who have degrees or who have been doing things for decades. And I'm like, you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. Like, why would I fucking listen to you? I don't care that you have a master's degree. Like, that tells me that you went to school and you were good at learning and regurgitating answers. Doesn't tell me that you can fix an actual problem. So I think expertise is a very like double-edged sword. And a lot of people, I also feel like we're moving out of this paradigm where the expectation is that we have to have like a degree or a certificate or to have like had some formal body of learning, and moving into this knowing and this leading through knowing and this being through knowing.
Oh, I love that. I love that you bring that in. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think especially I went on the part of, um, there are so many, like the life coaching thing that you were saying, like, who determines who is a coach? Who determines who
Right.
is good? Who determines, um, like how we, if you are credible to help other people. And yes, in many fields, like, like if we're talking about health, if we're talking about medicine, I'm not going to prescribe someone an antibiotic if I don't have experience or if I haven't learned about the antibiotic
Right.
specifically, right? That's
Right.
just plain stupid. But there are so many things, like for example, that we can just help each other with. For example, I now started two communities in the last 2 months, and it's small, like it's maybe 5 or 6 people, but I just was in contact with all these individuals, and I'm like, guys, if you start talking to each other, you can actually start helping each other out. First of all, it's going to be more fun because you're going to be having the feeling that you're doing things together. Second of all, you're going to be having expertise from all kind of angles and perspectives. So every individual, you know, like it can be like an incubator space from time to time, it can be a connecting space, whatever it is. And then the third thing is also like if we create these kind of systems that we can just, you know, like within this community, for example, there's a transformational life coach. There is someone who knows everything about the soil health and, you know, farm work because she studied that. Then there's this other girl who just now stepped into her women's health business that I'm helping her set up. And she is, and actually the thing is like she is living on a farm and doesn't know anything about farming. So you already see like where the transformational coach helps the person who is working the soil because she is dealing with a whole lot of issues around, okay, you know, like this is where we are in the world is really bad because she's looking at soil every day, basically, you know, like for example, then, but that girl, she can help my other friend who is now setting up the women's health business. And at the same time, the woman who is now setting up that business for women's health is helping the farm girl with her health and is also supporting the transformational coach in some kind of speech making thing that he needs to make. It's just like if you would have needed to pay for all of those services, you know how much money that is? And then it's just, you know, if you just come together and trust each other's expertise in particular fields, then you can have this beautiful exchange. And at the same time, that also for me, it's like, and then, you know, like for me, it's also like, okay, who am I to help that girl to set up her online business? Whereas actually, to be honest, I don't really have an online business that thrives in like millions, you know? I mean, I have an online business that thrives in abundance, but not in like millions of dollars. And but I'm helping her set up all the systems that I have learned and I have that I dove into in my journey of okay, how do I do this in the most free way possible? You know, like with the least amount of investments, but the highest amount of, you know, output. And then that other girl I got to know because she saw something that I was doing on Instagram with sharing a story, and she's like, "Hey, do you wanna help me out?" But do I feel like an expert in all of those areas? It's like, no, I don't have like, yeah, I have certificates, but I don't practice a particular certificate, you know? Like, yeah, I just weave it all together and it's like, yeah, if you get a coaching session from me, you get a mix of things that I'm credit credited for or certified for and a whole bunch of life experience. And I have a feeling it's the same with you. And who says then what the expertise actually is, you know? Like, yeah.
Yeah, this is
I
a
mean, I don't
super,
know how that is for
super.
you in your business.
Mhm.
I'm really curious to hear that actually.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, so we have like because my business partner and I both had the same degree from the same university, and worked at one of the same companies. So we both have this same or very similar like structure background, like problem solving, that kind of thing that we support clients with. But then we also have like our own other things as well. So what I mean by that is there are certain people that align more with me and more with like my way of coaching and teaching. And we'll tell people that too all the time because we're very like yin and yang. Um,
Mhm.
and so we've got that, like just the background and the experience that shaped us and mold us in like the delivery that we have in the way that we connect with people. And then there are also things that I weave into sessions with people. Like I'm trained in or certified in like three or four or five different energy healing modalities, but I don't practice on people for money. Like I just don't. I did a healing for someone over the weekend for their dog because their dog is transitioning right now and was having a lot of pain and was like just miserable basically. And I asked if, you know, is it okay if I um work on her if she is open to it? And she's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And you know, so sometimes these are things that I weave into sessions with actual clients of like t- intuitively taking them into spaces where I just did this with my business partner too over the weekend. She had, or maybe it was late last week, she had some stuff coming up and we like looked into the body and we did kind of like a scan. Like I intuitively knew where to guide her to look at. And I used one of the practices from one of the energy healing modalities that I use, but not fully. Um, and so I used that to help and guide her through clearing stuff out for herself. And these are things that we do with clients too. So that's not something I learned in business school. That's not something I learned in the corporate space. And it's also not something that I practice, on a regular basis either. But I know that it's a skill set that I have that when needed to tap into that, I can do so easily and readily. And oftentimes in my head, I'm thinking, I don't know where the fuck I'm taking this person. I don't know where the fuck this is going to go. I don't know where I'm guiding them. But that's also the magic of it because when you look at business and you look at business processes, there is a start and there is a finish, right? And there are all the steps in between. But then when you look at the intuitive side of guiding and healing and coaching, whether that's through energy work or it's through talking someone through something and helping them connect dots to have the awareness to then move it out of their system, whatever way that works, um, as like a healer, a practitioner, a coach, a mentor, like you may think that you know where something is going or needs to go for them, but it might not go there. It might not really need to go there. And that's the super beautiful part of like the way that we get to weave these things together through the experience and through the intuition and through the energetics of things, which I love doing because I'm always like, I'm not sure. Like we've done it with clients before, and it's so beautiful. When I'm like, hey, we're gonna do some weird shit. Are you ready? Just like, sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's how I started these communities too. I'm like, I don't know where this is going, but do you want to go on an experiment? Will you want to do an experiment with me? I'm gonna put all of these people in a room and I'm just gonna look what happens. And I remember in that meeting too, like everyone was kind of like, okay, so Iris, what are we gonna do? I'm like, well, okay, maybe just let's start with who are you? But I actually hadn't prepared anything. Um, and I think that's the beauty, when we come to the word expertise. For me, it really signifies experience. And if we really, really start embracing our life experiences and learn from them, then we learn that we actually know nothing. So it's always like we modern day society, we might have, created this concept of like our plannable, creatable world, which in many cases is probably true if you look at it in kind of like very small pieces. I can create that I'm gonna be picking up my phone in a couple of seconds. I can, like there are actually also tools that you can create like bring things together in your dreams, and then all of a sudden your dream is there. I mean, I experienced that myself with Los Higuerones. Like that's how I ended up there. I didn't even know, but it was the place that I always dreamt of. And um but then at the same time, only through experience we know that we actually don't know anything, and that in the end it's just a very intuitive the intuition that comes with the experience of like, okay, this feels good, this feels not so good. Oh, let's move here because I remember that as soon as I feel like that, something good is gonna be happening, Or if I move like this, I know something is I'm going in the wrong direction. So like through the experience, and then maybe you just become an expertise in like adjusting your course, like and feeling okay, where does it need to go? But then if we're talking about the concept of expertise, how we have created that, like you said, like it's, for example, I did my master degree in sustainability and leadership, and all of a sudden, people saw me as an expert in the field of sustainability and leadership, whereas I had no experience whatsoever. Now, maybe 6 years later, I can say, okay, I have experience in the field. Am I an expert? No, I don't know how, I don't know anything about the universe in a way. I just know little pieces. But I'm even those little pieces I'm not an expert in because, it's an ever evolving field of information. So as soon as we kind of say, yeah, I'm an expert, we also kind of, like put ourselves out there, but close our minds for the fact that we're actually still learning. So
Yes.
it's just this story that we put out in the world as like, oh yeah, because a lot of experts probably realize that they're continuously learning, but they just put out that story of, yeah, I'm the expert. And at the same time, it's just kind of like, that's a story that's not true. That's a story that's not fueling a system where everyone feels capable of doing something that they have experience in and offering that to other people because they don't have a certification for it, because that's
Mm.
often what we get to it. And it's just very interesting. And if people put me on the stand of being an expert, I become really uncomfortable because I know in my being that it's not true, but that I do have something valuable to share that can help them. That's what I'm sure of. So, what is then the idea of expertise in the end?
I love that. I love that because in a couple of things really like clicked in for me when you were talking. So you're like, I know nothing, right? Like I really don't. And I have this beautiful teacher who always says, the more I learn, the less I know. Where it's like the more I learn, the more I realize that the less I actually know, right? Because we live in this world of infinite knowledge and infinite possibilities. So you're never going to know everything. And I actually had a friend of mine 2 summers ago, I think it was. He was asking about my business and about what we do. And I was telling him, oh, yeah, we do process improvement and leadership development and da 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 da, whatever. And the immediate response that I got from him was that he had gone to this specific university and he'd gotten this specific degree. And he is in charge of this specific number of people, which was hilarious to me because I think it was like 60 or 65. And I was like, "Whew," at the pinnacle of my career, I was in charge of like 350 people. So that's kind of laughable. But he had this macho like furling up of like, I am man, hear me. I'm all that is man, like hear me roar, right? Like I went to this university and I got this degree and I'm in charge of 60 people and all of this stuff. And and the message was like, you don't know anything that I don't already know. There's nothing that you could teach me that I don't already know. Okay, that's cool. I'm not saying that there is, and I'm not saying that there isn't, right? But it was this instant like puff up of like I have all of these accolades. And so I think we also sometimes take accolades and we transfer that into knowledge and into expertise and into saying like because I have one, two, three, four, and five over here, that means I'm really worth 15 in the summation of things. And it's almost like I did this just popped in, but it's almost like we're constantly categorizing people and we're assigning them like labels and numbers and we're ranking them of like I know more than you or I know less than you, right? Which is a super, super interesting thing that we do that we've been taught to do, right? Um, so if anyone is listening right now that's having this feeling of like less than or more than, I would inspire you and I would encourage you to look at that as if we're putting someone else on a pedestal, then we put ourselves in a pit. Because any time that you are saying, I'm not saying like, don't look to people for knowledge and for experience and to learn from them. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying anytime you put someone else above you and that they're better than you automatically put yourself below them. Automatically. And we're all created equally. It doesn't matter like what religion I think that you look at, or what, like, we all come from the same source, right? We all come from the same source, so we're all created equally. We're just our own individual, unique expressions, and we're here to learn and master different things in this life. So I think expertise and experience, um, I would lean more towards what's the experience, right? Not what is the expertise, not, unless I'm going to like a surgeon, right? Then I want them to have like expertise and experience. Um,
Yeah.
but otherwise, like, what's the experience? What's your lived experience, and what have you gained and gleaned through that? Because it's so true. Like the more I learn, like, the more I dive into human design, and the more I dive into astrology, or the more I dive into, like, personal self-development and shifting of the identity, it's like you wanna talk about identity? Like, we as people, we identify with so many things and so many things, right? Like, every time you step into a new version of yourself, you now identify as that version. And so in order to get to the next highest version of yourself, you can no longer associate or identify with this version. You have to identify with a new version to become it. And so it's this constant process of like death and rebirth, death for rebirth, letting go to move higher, clearing out to take in the new. Like, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and in that way, like, we will never be the expert, you know? We will never be the expert. I don't believe we can. It's just a story that we're telling ourselves so, you know, we can function in this world has that that somehow started to require at one point that you needed to be an expert in order to be valuable, to be valued, and mainly be valued financially, right? So it's just a very interesting thing for me as well. And what you're mentioning there, I think is so precious. It's just like, you know, we're we're here to also realize that we deserve to be alive and that we deserve to be valued. And it just comes down to this like keeping people small kind of thing. If you keep putting that in like you need a certification for this, you need a certification for that, you need a degree in that, you needed to do this. And yes, if it's about surgery and like medical stuff, I again, health, I get it. Like, like basic things. If it's about, like I'm also not gonna create a food product if I don't know anything about healthy food, about what's healthy. Like, so there is some form of knowledge that you need in order to do the things that you want to be doing in such a way that it contributes to your life and all of life around you. So I'm talking about humans and the more than human world. And yes, there you need some expertise, like maybe some experience and knowledge first, just so, like the expertise. But then in order to be able to do that, you don't need like the certificate for it. And I think that's for me where it's also this valuation of people. It's that it just starts diminishing the value that we bring as people by just the virtue of our experience that we have throughout our lives, that can contribute to the lives of others, and that we believe that we can make that difference, like how. And at the same time, it's interesting too what you're saying there is like, oh yeah, we're identifying as this one person, and then we're starting to identify as the next, as the next, as the next, which is very important for us to grow. And at the same time, it's also just like, okay, yes, I can identify as as my next version that might, might have expertise in like, but if we still keep telling ourselves that our next version falls in the story of how we have defined expertise, then you're still fueling a paradigm which is actually not working. So, within this renewal of your story about yourself, it's also for me really important that we're starting to value ourselves based on the virtue of that we deserve to be alive, that we have something to bring, and that it's our duty and our responsibility to find out what the hell that is, by just looking back on your experiences and see what are the red threads. And then at the same time, start improving that what you are instead of like telling yourself, oh, I'm going to become an expert in this, because then you're striving for something that is outside of you instead of you're just saying like, oh yeah, I'm becoming this next person that is even more, that knows a little bit more about this and has a little bit more experience. And then actually that's really beautiful as well, because then like you'll start finding other, like somehow, because it's very practical what you're then like envisioning of becoming and what you're envisioning of leaving behind. So then, it's quite a bit easier to find those things too that bring you into that next person. Because then, it's just way more practical, it's more concrete, it's just and it's aligned with you, and it's not aligned with the idea of becoming an expert in some kind of field. And yeah, within that, I believe we're just being invited. We're just being invited into really assessing our narratives that we are telling ourselves, and also assessing whether the way we try to find answers to them, if those are really the ways that are best for us, our well-being, as the well as for the well-being of all life here on earth. Because as long as we're keeping the story of expertise, like, oh yeah, you need a certificate for this and you need a certificate for that, and you're only an expert if you're doing it in such and such and such way, instead of just saying, maybe none of us is an expert and we're just trying to figure this mess out together. Then all of a sudden there's a world opening up, and I will be opening myself up to hiring you as a coach. Whereas you might not have the certifications, but because you're like, yeah, I I also don't know, but let's figure it out together. And then because you make time to sit with my question, I pay you in some form that works for both of us. And then you get this way more organic exchange happening, instead of the set paywalls that are there, and the all the things that come with being an expert in these systems.
I think a very interesting point that you're talking about when you're talking about like getting, and I don't know if you use these specific words, but mastery is what came up for me. And when people like when we look at like certificates and we look at going through programs and things like that, and like how often do we see, oh, there's a mastermind for this and a mastermind for that? That term drives me fucking nuts. I'm like, mastery isn't a real thing. It's not real. And I know it's a buzzword, right? I know it's a buzzword. I know people
It's
love
such
to
a
use
buzzword
it.
right now.
Yeah, and it has been for years now, and it drives me fucking bonkers because I'm like, mastery is not it's not a real fucking thing. It's not real. And I did have someone paint me a perspective that was helpful for me to reframe the word in a way that I'm like, okay, if I look at it from this angle, it makes a little more sense to me. It's something I can get behind. But it was like, what if it's not like becoming the master or becoming the expert, but you are mastering where you're at? Like if I'm here and I want to be here, I'm mastering that shift, or I'm mastering like becoming and moving into the next version. And I'm like, ooh, okay. It wasn't said exactly like that, but I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense to me. But when people talk about mastery in the sense of like, I have mastered the thing. I have become the best. I have da 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 da. I passed the test, right? I'm like, mastery is not a real thing. It doesn't exist. We're always evolving and changing. And what if the thing that we mastered today by whatever it is, like today it's at like 10, right? And in 3 months, maybe 10 now becomes 15 because we've learned more knowledge. So therefore, you've no longer mastered the thing, right? Like you've got five more layers or levels to go before you then can have remastered it. So to me, like we're just in this ever evolving and changing. like you said, like the universe is expansive. I don't know a shit ton of stuff, right? And I will never know all of the things. It's physically impossible for us as humans to have mastery. That's my mastery rant.
Oh, I love it because you know what comes up for me when you're going like this. I'm like, oh, look about all these things. And at the end, that's just our story. You know, like it's our story that we have about mastery, like that we're holding. It's just like, or it's my story that I'm having about expertise and like ramping on these
Hmm.
things because I'm just frustrated with the fact that in the past I've experienced that I wasn't qualified enough to have particular roles because I didn't have those certificates. So I'm ramping on expertise and connecting that to certificates. And I could have joined you in this ramp about mastery and how we just like to glorify everything in order to, put our um power basically outside of ourselves into following some kind of guru that knows best. And and I was just like, am I gonna do that right now? And I was like, no, because I've mastered this skill of not coming into your story like that and letting me get dragged along. And but I just needed to laugh so hard because I'm like, okay, look at us sharing these stories here. So I hope now for all the listeners here that they also realize that, whatever we're saying is also just our perspective on the world, and it's very much like
100%.
an to just, assess your own stories that you're telling yourself and not
Yeah.
take yourself seriously at all while doing it. Because, like that process, if you're going to be deconditioning yourself from all those stories about what is good, what's bad, what's expertise, what's mastery, who am I, um, who do I give my power away to? It's just like, yeah, those are just stories, and that's something you can create. That's where you are the creator of your universe because you are the creator of the stories your mind is telling yourself. And for me, if you come back, oh wow, I didn't even know, by the way, that this was coming. But if you then come back to mind mastery, like then, like I can say, okay, I'm actually somewhere in some field I know how to master my mind. I'm not a mind master that can teach, like that is blowing it or screaming it off the rooftops of like I'm a mind master. I do share it from time to time because yeah, I have this skill of just looking at myself and then becoming conscious and taking that step back of like what are the narratives that I'm actually holding about all of this and how is that contributing to my world right now in the way that I, can direct my energy in the most effective way possible. And sometimes that's a ramp. Yeah, because that's needed, like sometimes it just needs to go out. It's a process. We all need to process. And other times it's like, yeah, maybe I'll take this frustration, and I've had that with Higueronis a couple of times now. Um, that I had some things going on in my life, and I just put all that energy that I had in the frustration into just like getting a bunch of output, like in the work for Los Higuerones generated, like beyond what I was capable of doing before. And I was like, whoa, look at what I did in an hour. That's great if I can use all that energy in like those kind of angles. So then I started my like with that experience, I'm like, oh, that's a good skill to kind of master a bit more. But yeah, what is the mastery in general? Because if you really look at it from this indigenous perspective too, I I've been learning from the Kogis, I've been learning from people in the Amazon, I've been learning from the monks in the Himalaya, like the Dakota tribes in the States, my own tribe, like my own indigenous background in Europe, and they all are saying, "You guys, modern day society, you are just younger brothers. You are just you're only grasping just like maybe a slither of what we know this world, this earth is capable of and what it needs. So you calling yourself a master, as a modern day human is one of the biggest lies you'll ever tell yourself. And um, that one always stuck with me because I'm like, if we're getting ahead of ourselves, it's just like we're always evolving, like you say, and we're always just this this species of humans that have come alive here that are now being invited to really reassess what our world is needing. And people like you and me, like both chose chose a different path and realized that structures and systems need to be regenerated. And you do that in the corporate world and without necessarily having the super clear vision of what that can look like, because we have not experienced it yet. But we just based on the experiences that we've had, at least for me, I can say I have my intuition and my heart as a compass. And if that feels right, and if I'm not like with the idea that I have flying somewhere, having a feeling that I'm flying somewhere out of there, but that it's actually like brings me really into the presence of just like, whoa, almost like a rock is hitting me. Those are like signs for me that I'm like, okay, this is good. And then also all of a sudden when you come to this part of like, okay, what is then the next step? It's like, then all of a sudden you're probably also, for me, I'm really okay with taking those steps really slow because I feel that this is good, this is rooted, so it's already there. And then it's like what you're saying, you're becoming that next version of yourself that starts watering those roots and starts putting compost with those roots. And then the tree starts growing. But it might actually be that we will never see what the tree eventually is going to be looking like. And if we're talking about like quotes and everything, it's just like the true master realizes that he might never see the fruits of his work. So it's just
So
like,
true.
yeah, it's an interesting, beautiful topic. And I'm so happy that we are talking about this stuff in just this space, and I hope a lot of people realize that they can do the same thing. Like we're just two ordinary girls, but we just
100%,
chose to start
100%.
to be the student of life
Yeah, yeah,
and not be the student of an expertise.
exactly, exactly. And I love what you're saying before about like not picking up other people's stuff, right? Because that's something that and I know that we've talked about this in previous episodes too, where it's like we are so inundated all of the time with programming and conditioning, whether it's through TV. I mean, it can be through a program that you watch, a movie that you watch. It can be through social media. It's literally everywhere, right? Like there's constantly programming all of the time. And so when we're really looking at the deconditioning and the reprogramming of ourselves, it's really like stripping down to like what's true for me, not what was true for my father, right? Like not what was true for my mother, not what is true for the society that I live in, or not what is true for the society that I'm currently in, right? Because you don't live in a society that you were born into, right? Like you're living in a completely different society. And what is true for this society may be more in alignment with who you are at your core. And so I think this is a very interesting aspect as well, because especially like if you're working with someone, if you're working with a coach, like I think people don't talk enough about how you can create new traumas and how you can like you don't just have the trauma that you were born with or that you got from 0 to 7 or whatever, right? Like you can create new traumas as an adult. And you can create new paradigms and new stories as an adult that are not in alignment with you. You can enter into relationship with people or coaching programs or containers or whatever, and you can pick up a whole boatload of shit that you then get to decondition later. So, like, and then going back to the intuition, right? Really lean into your intuition and learn what your intuition is saying to you, learn how it speaks to you, and learn what it's saying. Because I know, I'll just take some examples of for me and my business partner. We're very, very different learners. We're very different processors. We're drawn to very different people. Some people we are drawn to the same people sometimes. Um, and then oftentimes, even when we're drawn to the same person, one of us will continue to work with that person while the other one's like, no, I'm good. I got what I needed. Right. And if there's this level or this layer of, I don't know who I am, so I'm just going to follow what the other one does, then that wouldn't be serving us, right? Because we could be picking up, and this has happened. This has happened for both of us, where we have worked with someone and we have picked up shit that was not ours, right?
Yeah,
Like
totally.
very deeply ingrained in the spiritual community is that I cannot provide a service for money, or I cannot make a lot of money in providing something that seems spiritual. This can be true for some people at their very core. It can be true, right? But for other people, it's not true. And that's not what they're here to learn and master in this life and in this experience. But and I remember one of my first mentors working with them, and I was learning intuition and energy and all of these things. And they very, very specifically said, well, you can't make money doing this. I make X amount of money a year, which is well below the poverty line here in the States. And I felt crushed, right? I was like, well, I can't go back to a corporate job into corporate America because that's not who I am. And that phase of my life is done. And then I thought, oh, I'm just going to be like an energy healer and a practitioner, right? And then when her belief came in, I was crushed. And I immediately adopted it. And I was like, oh shit, well, what am I going to do now? How am I going to survive? Right. So these things 100%, and like you and I have very different beliefs about some of these things, but I love your belief systems and I love like where you're at and I honor that so much and it's so beautiful. And I know the inverse is true. Like we are just two very, very different humans with a lot of similarities and that are living different but also parallel lives, right? I think that's so, so beautiful to speak into also like it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with expertise, but just with where we're at currently in society, right? Like everyone, if you're here and I'm here, a lot of people now look at this as there's a divide, there's a fucking canyon between us, and the canyon shall remain. It's not that I'm going to build a bridge to the other side so we can cohabitate and so we can, do things together where we agree and where we align and how we can share things with each other. It's nope, the canyon stays. And I think this is part of the gap that we're both bridging and that we're all attempting, or not all, but most of us are attempting to bridge right now with healing, with self-development, with having these conversations, right? It's a deeper exploration of not only like where we are as a society and how maybe far off the mark in some cases we are and how like spot on we are in others, but how can we just come back together? Because
Yeah.
no one's right and no one's wrong, right? Like we're all here having each individual unique experiences. So, and that could spin us off into, into a whole other topic. So instead of doing that, um, do you have any last words that you'd like to say on that or on like everything we've talked about today?
I think it's just interesting day in general. I'm just very grateful to be able to have this conversation with you. There's just, beyond us just ramping about expertise or sharing our stories and everything that, like, yeah, basically the narrative that we're holding based on our experience, and in a way sharing some things that we have mastered, like in our minds, in how we work with things, in how we combine the energetic work with actually like very physical creational things here, like in corporate worlds or for me in local communities. It's just, I think it's just very, very beautiful how we're just collaboratively figuring out some things. Because in the end, I believe that that's what we're really here to do. Because it's through these conversations that things start clicking for me, and I just like I needed to write down a couple of things just now. I was like, okay, I need to come back to this. So thank you for those insights, and I will, on my walk that I'm gonna be doing right now to kind of digest the talk, it's just like, okay, I'm gonna be sitting with that. I'm gonna be looking at that and see, okay, how do I bring that into practice to become my next version that is showing even up as a better person for this world and for the people that I work with, but also for the people that I live with and you know the life around me. So thank you so much for, yeah, for co-figuring life out with me in that way. And I'm looking forward to the next one. I'm not sure what the next one is gonna be, but maybe we should leave it open. See where
Yeah.
it's gonna go.
Yeah, next week will be an open topic, so we
Yeah,
can just talk about all the things. What's what's new and what's,
yeah.
currently coming to the surface.
Do you have any last words?
Oh, man. I would say the thing that's, like, really on my heart right now is, like, if you're looking for someone to work with and if you're looking for someone to support you in your evolution and what you're moving through, um, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And there are always times in my life where I'm working with a coach or where I'm working with someone else in a supportive manner to get me to my next highest evolution. And so for anyone out there who is looking to work with someone, use discernment and ask a lot of questions. I feel like I've said this before on calls, but I feel like it cannot be said enough.
Mm,
Question, right? Like ask questions
yeah.
and go with your gut. Like if something in your gut says, "Oh shit," probably don't move forward,
Listen.
right? Like stop and listen. And as always, if you guys have questions or comments or post them in the comments. You can reach out to either one of us via social media. Look back at other episodes. You can find our email addresses and things like that, so you can reach out. Like I'm always happy to answer people's questions, and I'm always happy to hop on calls with people and help to guide them in the right direction. Because with coaching, as with anything, like I know that I am not for everyone. I know that I'm not, right, and everyone is not for me. Um, we're all at different phases and different stages of our life. Like some people will resonate just like people I've worked with before. Like some months I resonate very, very strongly with them, and I keep coming back to their work and keep coming back and keep coming back. And then I'll have a lull of a couple of months where I'm like, oh, I don't need that right now. I don't need to look at this content, or I don't need to work with them, or I don't need to be in their community right now. And then I'll come back to it later on. So I would say like 100% like listen to what is serving you. And if you have questions about like what's it like to work with a coach, or what is it like to what are good questions to ask maybe, um 100% like post those in the comments or reach out to either one of us and we can help guide you on that process, because I never want someone to feel like they're alone in that, and I never want someone to think that they can't ask, because I'm a big, big, big asker of questions. Like I'm gonna ask you, and I may ask the same question like 10 different ways. And I always encourage people to do the same thing, because if you don't understand and if you're not getting to the point where it makes sense to you, then keep asking, right? Like if it's not sitting
Yeah,
well, if it's not a hell yes in your body, if it's not a fuck yes or a hell yes, whatever language you want to use, like if it's not a full body yes, it's a no. And I know sometimes that can be easier said than done. Um, because maybe this person has like a million subscribers, or they do, and this is a hot thing too, is like, oh my gosh, they've got so many people that already work with them, or oh my gosh, they make $30 million a year, so
Yeah,
why wouldn't I want to work with them? Cool that they make that or they don't make that, right? Like just because they do or they don't doesn't mean that they are or aren't right for you. So
exactly.
just, ask questions, lean into your intuition, lean into your discernment, and and we're happy to support you in wherever you're at in that process. Um, I know I do this with people on threads all the time because of like the background and the experience that I have with different things. Like there's a gentleman who's writing a book right now, and I used to be a ghostwriter and I do some editing work still from time to time. Um, and he's having some issues, right? And I'm like, can I give you some advice? Like, can I give you some like, he's struggling with feeling guilty about like the creation of a book. And I'm like, don't, because we need everyone's like experience and viewpoint and all of these things, right? And so he's like, yeah, absolutely DM me. So I'm like, send him like books, right? Like I'm sending him like huge blocks of text on ways that he can move through this stuff. Was it in the hopes that I got him as a client? No. It was to help this person who's doing valuable work in the world to move past where they're at and to create something beautiful and meaningful, right? And that's what I think we're
Mm,
all here to do. We're all here, like, we all have knowledge, we all have resources, we all have experience, and we get to share that however that looks for us. So that was a lot,
mm,
but
I love it. Thank you for that one. I think
yeah,
it's a
thank
beautiful
you.
closing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we will see you guys on the next episode. Have a beautiful day. And until then.